The evening had started out so peacefully. The sky was covered with thick gray clouds and soft rain tapped gently on the car windows as the family drove home. The father kept his eyes on the road, trying to see through the mist while the mother sat beside him humming softly. In the back seat, their little child was half asleep, clutching a small stuffed toy and whispering a tune that only they knew. They had spent the afternoon visiting relatives and laughing over old stories. The mood had been light, the kind of happiness that makes time disappear. No one could have imagined how quickly things would change. The rain began to fall harder, streaking down the windshield. The father turned on the wipers, squinting to see the road ahead. The mother reached back, adjusting the blanket over the child's lap. The headlights reflected off the wet surface, creating long, shifting lines of light. For a moment, everything seemed calm. Then it happened. A truck came speeding from the opposite direction. The driver had lost control on the slippery road. The father tried to turn the wheel to the right, but the tires skidded. The sound of metal scraping and glass breaking filled the air. The world spun in blinding flashes of light and noise until everything went black. When the car finally stopped moving, there was a silence so deep it felt unreal. The smell of smoke and fuel filled the air. The father groaned, his hands shaking as he tried to move. The mother turned her head slowly, her heart racing. Her first thought wasn't about herself. It was about the back seat. The child wasn't moving. She called out their name again and again, but there was no answer. Panic flooded her voice as she tried to reach back, but her seatbelt locked tight. The father pushed against the door, shouting for help. The rain kept falling, washing over the broken glass scattered across the road. Moments later, headlights appeared from a distance. A passing driver stopped, jumped out of the car, and ran toward them. More people arrived, calling emergency services, trying to comfort the parents as they waited. The sound of sirens soon filled the night, followed by flashing red and blue lights cutting through the darkness. Paramedics rushed in, pulling open the car doors, checking pulses, and speaking quickly to each other. The father's forehead was bleeding and the mother's arm was badly hurt, but both kept asking the same question: "Is our child okay?" One of the paramedics didn't answer. He carefully lifted the small body from the back seat, his expression grave. He shouted instructions to another medic as they placed the child on a stretcher. Machines were connected, oxygen was given, and chest compressions began. Every second felt endless. The parents could only watch as their child's life hung in the balance. The ambulance doors closed and the sirens began again. The mother and father were taken in separate vehicles to the hospital. Rain pounded against the windows all the way there. The mother whispered silent prayers, her hands trembling, replaying the moment over and over again. She couldn't remember the last thing her child had said before the crash, and that thought broke her heart. When they reached the hospital, nurses and doctors were already waiting. The parents were quickly checked for injuries, but neither cared about themselves. They only wanted to know if their child was alive. Every minute felt heavier than the last. The child was taken into the emergency room, surrounded by doctors in green scrubs and masks. Machines beeped, monitors flashed, and voices echoed down the hallway. Outside, the mother waited in a wheelchair, gripping the edge of her blanket, staring at the closed door. The father stood beside her, his clothes still wet from the rain. Neither spoke. They were too afraid of what might come next. Hours passed. The door opened and a doctor stepped out. His eyes told them what his words struggled to say. The child's condition was critical. There was internal bleeding, a head injury, and very little brain activity. The doctor explained that they were doing everything they could, but the chances were slim. The mother broke down, covering her face with her hands. The father stood frozen, unable to move or speak. He finally sat beside her, pulling her close as both tried to find comfort in silence. Nurses came and went, checking on them, offering tea and blankets, but the parents couldn't think about anything except the small figure lying behind those doors. The night felt endless. Every sound from the hospital corridor made their hearts jump. Whenever a doctor passed by, they looked up, hoping for good news that never came. At one point, a nurse allowed them to see the child for a few minutes. The room was quiet except for the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. The child's small face looked peaceful, too peaceful. Tubes and wires ran across the bed, connecting to machines that kept track of every heartbeat, every breath. The mother sat beside the bed, brushing a hand over her child's hair, whispering softly. The father stood behind her, trying not to cry. but his eyes were wet. The mother spoke about the park they had planned to visit next weekend, about the drawing their child had made that morning, about how they had promised to bake cookies together. Her words trembled as she tried to hold on to hope. She told her child that everything would be okay, even though she didn't know if that was true. Hours turned into the next morning. The sun rose, but it didn't feel like morning. The hospital lights never changed and time moved slowly. The doctors continued their work, adjusting medicine, checking responses, waiting for signs of improvement that didn't come. Family members arrived, some with flowers, others simply standing there in silence. They hugged the parents, told them to stay strong, but the parents could barely respond. It felt as though the world around them had stopped moving, and they were trapped in a place between hope and despair. As the day went on, the mother noticed the child's hand had grown colder. She rubbed it gently, whispering, "Stay with me." The father closed his eyes, unable to watch. The machines continued to hum softly, steady and cruel. Late that night, the doctor came back again. His voice was quiet but firm. He told them that the situation was worsening. The child's brain activity had dropped even lower, and their body was no longer responding well to treatment. He said they would keep trying, but they had to prepare themselves for the possibility that their child might not survive. The mother shook her head, refusing to believe it. She begged the doctor to try again, to not give up. The father stood beside her, numb, his hands clenched into fists. The doctor placed a hand on his shoulder before walking away. The parents stayed by the bedside the entire night. They spoke softly, telling stories from when their child was younger, about their first day of school, about how they loved animals, about how they always laughed when it rained. They cried together, held each other, and prayed. Every now and then the mother leaned forward, listening for the faint sound of breathing. The father whispered that everything would be fine, though his voice cracked with doubt. They refused to leave, even when nurses suggested they rest. How could they rest when the most precious thing in their life was slipping away right before them? Outside, the rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray. Inside, the machines kept a slow, steady rhythm. The room felt colder now, as if even the air understood the sadness that filled it. In those long hours, something changed between the parents. They stopped speaking about what might happen and started speaking about what had already been. The moments, the laughter, the love. They realized that even if the worst were to come, their child had already given them more joy than they ever imagined possible. Still, they couldn't let go. Hope, fragile as it was, refused to die completely. Every small beep from the monitor felt like a promise that maybe, just maybe, something could still change. As the first light of dawn broke through the hospital window, the mother rested her head beside her child's hand. Her eyes were swollen from tears, but she whispered once more, "Please wake up. Please come back to us." The father placed a hand on her shoulder, silently wishing for the same miracle. Neither of them knew what the next few hours would bring. But even in their pain, one truth remained. Love was stronger than fear, and hope was still alive, faint but unbroken. The morning after the long, sleepless night began quietly in the hospital. The hallway lights flickered faintly, and the sound of footsteps echoed as nurses moved from room to room. The mother hadn't slept at all. She sat beside the hospital bed, her eyes fixed on her child's face. The father stood near the window, his hands tucked in his pockets, staring out at the cloudy sky. The machines next to the bed beeped steadily. Every sound made the parents jump a little, hoping for a sign of change. But nothing changed. The child lay still, surrounded by tubes and wires. The faint rhythm of the heart monitor was the only sign of life. A nurse entered the room quietly and greeted them with a soft smile. She checked the monitor, adjusted the IV line, and looked at the mother with sympathy. "You should try to rest," she said gently. But the mother shook her head. "I can't," she whispered. The nurse didn't insist. She simply placed a comforting hand on the mother's shoulder before leaving the room. The father walked closer to the bed, his steps slow and heavy. He reached out and touched the child's hand. It was small and pale, but still warm. "You're strong," he murmured. "You've always been strong." He didn't know if his words could be heard, but he kept talking anyway. It was all he could do. Later in the morning, the doctor came in with a group of nurses. He spoke gently, explaining the latest reports. The child's condition hadn't improved. The brain was still not responding the way they hoped. "We're doing everything we can," he said. "But right now there's no change." His words were heavy. He looked at the parents with kind eyes, but they both knew what he meant. The mother's tears began to fall again. The father squeezed her hand tightly, trying to stay strong for her even though he felt broken inside. After the doctor left, the room was quiet once more. The ticking clock on the wall seemed louder than usual. As the day went on, family members came to visit. They brought food that no one ate and flowers that filled the room with a soft scent. Some tried to comfort the parents, saying things like, "Miracles happen," or "Keep believing." The parents nodded politely, but deep down, they were scared. Hope was slipping away a little more with every passing hour. That afternoon, the mother began to talk softly to her child again. She spoke about their favorite bedtime stories, about how the child used to hide behind the curtains when playing hide and seek, and how their laughter used to fill the house. Her voice trembled, but she kept talking because she believed that somewhere, somehow her child could still hear her. The father joined in. He spoke about the day the child learned to ride a bicycle, how many times they had fallen, and how proud they looked when they finally got it right. He smiled faintly at the memory. Those moments felt so close and yet so far away. Hours passed slowly. The parents barely noticed the nurses changing shifts, the meals they didn't touch, or the world outside moving on. Time had stopped for them. All that existed was the hospital room and the soft beeping sound that reminded them their child was still here. As evening approached, the doctor returned with another update. He looked tired, but his voice remained gentle. "We need to prepare for the possibility that things may not turn around," he said softly. "We'll keep monitoring through the night, but—" He didn't finish his sentence. He didn't need to. The mother's face turned pale. The father looked away, his jaw tightening as he fought back tears. When the doctor left, the mother stood and went to the window. Outside, the rain had started again, tapping gently against the glass. "I can't lose them," she whispered. "I just can't." Her voice broke with pain. The father walked over and wrapped his arms around her. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other, both afraid to speak the truth that hung between them. That night was the hardest of all. The nurses dimmed the lights and the hospital grew quiet except for the soft hum of machines. The parents stayed beside their child, each lost in their own thoughts. The father closed his eyes for a few moments, resting his head against the edge of the bed. The mother sat silently, staring at her child's face, trying to memorize every detail. The curve of the eyelashes, the tiny freckles on the nose, the gentle shape of the mouth. Every little thing mattered now. Every second felt precious. Sometime after midnight, a nurse entered the room to check on them. She noticed how tired the parents looked. "Would you like me to bring some tea?" she offered kindly. The mother nodded, not because she wanted tea, but because she didn't know what else to say. When the nurse left, the father whispered, "I don't understand why this happened. We were just driving home." His voice cracked. Everything was fine. The mother didn't answer. She simply reached for his hand. There were no words that could make sense of something like this. Later, as the hours passed, the father began to speak softly again, this time to their child. He talked about how much they loved them, how proud they were, and how the house felt empty without their laughter. His voice trembled, and he had to pause several times to hold back tears. "If you can hear us," he said quietly, "just know we're here. We're not going anywhere." The mother placed her hand gently over their child's chest, feeling the faint rise and fall. She whispered a prayer, asking for strength, asking for one more chance. She didn't ask for a miracle anymore. She only asked for time. When morning came again, the doctor returned with a heavy expression. He explained that the child's condition had reached a critical stage. The brain activity was fading further. The doctor spoke carefully, giving them time to absorb every word. "Sometimes," he said, "the kindest thing we can do is to let go." The mother shook her head instantly. "No," she whispered. "We can't." The father's voice broke as he said, "Please, there has to be something else you can do." But the doctor simply looked down. There were no more treatments left to try. He told them that they didn't have to decide immediately. He wanted them to have time, to talk, to say goodbye if it came to that. Then he quietly left the room. The silence that followed was unbearable. The mother buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. The father walked to the corner of the room and leaned against the wall, staring at the floor. He felt helpless, angry, and heartbroken all at once. When he finally turned back to look at the hospital bed, something inside him softened. He saw his child lying there, peaceful and still, and he realized that love wasn't about control. It was about holding on and letting go at the right time. But how could he ever let go of someone who meant everything to him? The day moved slowly. Nurses came and went. Family members stopped by, but the parents barely spoke. They just sat there hand in hand, watching the rise and fall of their child's chest, praying that it wouldn't stop. That evening, the mother asked the nurse if she could play soft music in the room. The nurse smiled and brought a small speaker. Gentle piano music filled the air, the kind that always made the child fall asleep peacefully. The mother whispered, "Do you remember this song? You used to ask me to play it every night." Her voice cracked, but she kept smiling through the tears. The father sat quietly beside her, closing his eyes, letting the memories wash over him. The music, the smell of hospital disinfectant, the hum of the machines. It all blended into something that felt like both pain and love. As night settled again, the doctor came in once more. He checked the monitors and looked at the parents. "We'll keep the life support on through the night," he said softly. "If there's any change, we'll let you know right away." Then he turned to leave, giving them space. When he was gone, the mother placed her hand gently over her child's. "We're here," she whispered. "We're not leaving." The father nodded silently beside her. The two sat there all night, their eyes heavy but unwilling to close. The soft beeping of the machines filled the silence, steady but fragile. Every sound felt like a reminder that their child was still fighting. And even though the doctors had given up hope, the parents refused to. They couldn't, because somewhere deep inside, something told them that the story wasn't over yet. As the first light of morning touched the window once more, the mother leaned forward and kissed her child's forehead. She whispered the same words she had whispered every night since the accident. "Please come back to us." And though the room was still silent, a faint warmth lingered in the air, as if some unseen force was still listening. The days that followed felt endless. The hospital room had become a second home to the parents. They barely left, afraid that if they stepped away even for a moment, something might happen. Nurses brought them food and blankets, but most of the time the plates remained untouched. Their entire world was the quiet hum of machines and the fragile rhythm of their child's breathing. The doctors continued to monitor the child, but the news was always the same. No improvement, no change. Each morning began with the same question from the parents, and each evening ended with the same heavy silence. The doctors had done all they could, but science had limits. What kept the parents going now wasn't medicine. It was love and the tiniest spark of faith that refused to fade completely. One morning, the lead doctor asked to speak with them privately. They followed him down the hallway, their footsteps echoing softly against the white floor. In his office, the doctor sat across from them, his expression serious yet kind. He explained that the child's condition had reached a point where the machines were doing most of the work. There was almost no sign of brain activity, and the chances of recovery were nearly impossible. He spoke carefully, choosing his words with compassion. He said that sometimes letting go was the hardest but kindest decision a parent could make. He told them they didn't have to decide right away. He wanted them to have time to think, to talk, and to say goodbye in their own way. The mother shook her head as tears filled her eyes. "You're asking me to give up," she whispered. The doctor sighed softly. "I know how much you love your child," he said, "and we've done everything possible. But we also don't want your child to suffer." The father stared at the floor, unable to speak. The idea of letting go felt unbearable. After the meeting, they returned to the room in silence. The mother sat down and reached for her child's hand. She stroked it gently, whispering words that only a mother could say. The father stood beside her, lost in thought. He couldn't imagine walking out of this room without their child. He couldn't imagine a life without the laughter that used to fill their home. For the next few days, they lived hour by hour. Every sound from the monitors made their hearts jump. Every small twitch, every flutter of movement felt like hope. But each time, the doctors told them it was just a reflex, nothing more. The hospital staff grew quieter around them. They had all grown close to this little family. Nurses who usually smiled now looked away when they passed. Even the janitor who cleaned the hallway every evening would pause and nod softly before moving on. The story of the child who refused to give up had touched everyone in the building. One evening, the doctor came again, holding a clipboard. He sat beside the parents and spoke in a calm, gentle tone. "I know how hard this is," he said. "But the time might be coming when you have to decide. We can't keep the machines running forever." The mother's hands shook as she covered her face. "No," she said quietly. "Please, just one more night." The doctor hesitated, then nodded. "One more night," he agreed softly. When he left, the room felt heavier than ever. The father turned off the small lamp by the bed, leaving only the soft glow of the machines. The mother rested her head on the edge of the bed, her fingers still wrapped around her child's hand. The father sat close, resting his arm around her shoulders. Neither spoke. There were no more words left to say. Time passed slowly. The quiet rhythm of the monitors became a kind of lullaby. The parents drifted in and out of light sleep, waking with every change in sound. Outside, the world continued as normal. Cars moved, people laughed, the sun rose and set. But inside that room, life stood still. By the next morning, something in the air felt different. It wasn't something they could see or explain, but the mother felt it first. She sat up suddenly and looked at her child. Everything looked the same, the machines, the tubes, the still body. But something about the atmosphere had changed. It felt warmer, softer somehow. The father opened his eyes, noticing her sudden movement. "What is it?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "I don't know. It just feels different." A nurse entered to check the machines and smiled gently at them. "You're still here," she said kindly. The mother nodded. "We're not leaving." The nurse looked at the monitors, noted the readings, and whispered, "You two are the strongest parents I've ever met." Later that afternoon, the doctor returned with 2 other staff members. They spoke softly with the parents about signing papers, documents for consent if they decided to turn off the machines. The father couldn't bring himself to look at them. The mother's hands trembled as she held the pen but couldn't move it. The doctor understood. "You don't have to do this now," he said. "Take your time." He placed a comforting hand on her shoulder and left the room, closing the door behind him. For a long time, the parents sat in silence. The sound of the machine seemed louder now. The mother began to cry quietly, her tears falling onto the bedsheet. "What if they can still hear us?" she whispered. The father's voice was rough. "Then they'll know we never gave up." The mother stood up and leaned close to her child. "If you can hear me," she said softly, "I love you. We both love you more than anything. You're our whole world." She paused, her voice shaking. "But if you're tired, it's okay. You can rest. Just know we'll never stop loving you." The father couldn't hold back anymore. He bent down, placing his forehead against the edge of the bed. His tears fell silently as he whispered, "You made us so proud. You were our sunshine. I'll never forget the way you used to laugh." The room was filled with quiet sobs and the steady beeping of the monitor. Minutes felt like hours. The parents didn't move. They stayed like that, holding on to their child, afraid to let go. Eventually, the nurse came back and softly asked if they were ready. The mother couldn't answer. The father nodded slowly. "Just give us a few more minutes," he said. The nurse stepped back, giving them space. The mother kissed her child's forehead, her hands shaking. She whispered, "Please, if you can hear me, come back to us. Just give us one more sign. Anything." The father stood beside her, silent tears falling down his face. Then, something unexpected happened. A faint sound came from the monitor, a small, irregular beep. The parents froze. The nurse looked at the machine, confused. "That's strange," she murmured. She pressed a few buttons, checking the readings. The heart rate just increased slightly. The doctor was called in immediately. He rushed into the room, scanning the monitor and the child's body. The mother clutched her hands together, her heart pounding. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice trembling. The doctor didn't answer right away. He was staring at the numbers on the screen. "It's faint," he said finally, but the brain activity just showed a small spike. The parents gasped. "Does that mean—" The doctor lifted a hand gently. "It's too soon to say, but it's something." The mother leaned closer to her child, tears streaming down her face. "You can do it," she whispered. "We're here. Don't stop fighting." Minutes passed and the room filled with tense silence. Everyone watched the monitor, waiting for another change. The doctor stayed by the bed, eyes fixed on the screen. The nurse held her breath. Then suddenly another small movement appeared on the monitor. A second spike. The doctor looked stunned. It's happening again. He checked the child's pupils, then the pulse. There's a slight response, he said in disbelief. The mother covered her mouth with her hands. The father took a step forward, hardly daring to breathe. Is it real? He asked. The doctor nodded slowly. It's real. Tears of shock and joy filled the room. The mother leaned down, pressing her forehead to her child's hand. Thank you, she whispered again and again. Thank you for coming back. The doctor gave new instructions to the staff, ordering more tests and scans. Nurses hurried in and out, adjusting machines and taking readings. The room, once quiet and filled with sorrow, now buzzed with new energy. A sense of something incredible unfolding. Hours passed, and the faint signs of life continued to strengthen. The doctors couldn't explain it. It defied logic, but the parents didn't care about explanations. They just held on to their child, grateful beyond words. That night, when everyone else had left, the parents stayed beside the bed once more. The mother whispered, "You came back to us." "You really came back." The father nodded, his voice barely a whisper. Maybe miracles are real after all. They didn't know what the next day would bring, but for the first time in weeks, hope felt alive again. The darkness that had surrounded them began to fade, replaced by something brighter, something that felt like a second chance. The next morning brought a strange mix of fear and hope. The parents sat beside the hospital bed, barely daring to blink, watching every tiny movement on the monitor. The doctors and nurses came in and out, checking numbers, adjusting wires, speaking in quiet voices. No one could explain what had happened the night before. The child's vitals had improved slightly, but after so many days of silence, even the smallest change felt like a miracle. The mother held her child's hand tightly, afraid to let go. Her fingers traced small circles on the back of that fragile hand as tears rolled down her cheeks. The father stood close, his eyes fixed on the screen, his heart pounding with both excitement and fear. He wanted to believe this was real, but he was terrified it might just be temporary. The doctor entered the room with a few test results in his hand. He spoke softly, as if afraid to disturb the fragile calm in the air. "We ran the scans again," he said. "There's still a lot of uncertainty, but the brain is showing slight activity in areas that were silent before." His voice trembled a little. Even he couldn't hide his amazement. "I can't promise anything, but this is not something we see often." The mother pressed her hands together, whispering a quiet thank you under her breath. The father asked if their child could hear them. The doctor nodded slowly. "We can't say for sure," he replied, "but it's possible. Sometimes hearing returns before full awareness." The parents exchanged a look filled with both hope and disbelief. They leaned closer to the bed. The mother began to speak softly. "We're right here, sweetheart," she said. "You're doing so well. Everyone's so proud of you." Her voice broke for a moment, but she continued. "You're not alone, okay? We're right beside you." Hours passed. Nurses came in to check vitals and left with quiet smiles. There was a different feeling in the room now, a lightness that hadn't been there for weeks. Even the doctor seemed to move with more energy, his tone less heavy. Still, no one wanted to celebrate too early. As night fell, the hospital grew quiet again. The parents stayed awake, their eyes glued to the bed. The mother sang softly, a lullaby she used to hum every night before bed. Her voice was shaky but filled with love. The father joined her, his voice low and gentle. It was a song of comfort, of hope. Then something happened that made both of them freeze. The child's hand moved. It wasn't much, just a small twitch. But to them, it was everything. The mother gasped, grabbing the father's arm. "Did you see that?" she whispered. He nodded, his eyes wide, his breath caught in his throat. They called for the nurse, who came running. She saw it too and quickly called the doctor. Within seconds, the room was filled with medical staff. The doctor leaned over the child, speaking gently, checking reflexes, pupils, and breathing. "Can you hear me?" he said softly. "If you can, try to move again." For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, the child's fingers twitched once more. The mother began to cry openly now, her hands trembling as she covered her mouth. The father couldn't speak. He simply watched, overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't put into words. The doctor smiled faintly. "It's a response," he said. "It's weak, but it's real." He turned to the parents. "Keep talking to them. Your voice might be helping," so they did. All night long they spoke. They talked about home, about the garden filled with flowers, about the child's favorite stories and jokes. They reminded their little one of the life waiting beyond that hospital bed. Every word carried love, and every word reached out like a hand pulling their child back toward the world. By morning, the child's breathing had become steadier. The color in their cheeks returned slightly. The doctors were cautious but hopeful. The father walked out into the hallway for the first time in days and took a deep breath. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel like the world was collapsing. He went to the small hospital cafe and brought back 2 cups of tea. When he handed one to the mother, she smiled faintly for the first time since the accident. "Maybe this is the start," she whispered. "Maybe they're coming back to us." Over the next 2 days, the progress continued. The child's responses became more consistent. Tiny hand movements, slight shifts of the eyelids. Nurses and doctors began to smile when they entered the room. Other patients' families whispered about the miracle happening down the hall. One morning, as sunlight poured through the window, the mother sat beside the bed reading a story aloud. Her voice was calm, steady. The father was resting in the chair beside her, his eyes closed but his mind alert. Then, in the middle of the story, something happened that neither of them could have imagined. A faint sound broke the quiet of the room. It was a small, raspy whisper, barely audible, but the parents froze immediately. The mother looked at the bed, her heart racing. She leaned closer, her eyes wide. "Did you say something?" she whispered. The child's lips moved slightly, and a few seconds later a soft voice escaped, a fragile whisper that changed everything. "I saw light." And it said, "It's not my time yet." The room went still. The mother covered her mouth with both hands, tears streaming down her face. The father stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "Did you hear that?" he whispered in shock. The doctor and nurse rushed in, thinking something was wrong. But when they saw the tears and smiles mixed on the parents' faces, they realized something extraordinary had happened. The doctor leaned in close. "Can you say that again?" he asked softly. The child's lips trembled, and though the voice was weak, the same words came again, almost clearer this time. "It's not my time yet." For a few seconds, everyone in the room stood frozen. The nurse's eyes filled with tears. The doctor whispered, This shouldn't be possible." The mother bent down, her forehead pressed against her child's hand. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Thank you for coming back." The doctor gave instructions for immediate tests, trying to understand what had just happened. But as he left, he couldn't help looking back at the child with a look of pure wonder. Something beyond science had just taken place. Word spread quickly through the hospital. Nurses who had worked in the ICU for decades said they had never seen anything like it. Some called it a miracle. Others said it was sheer willpower. Whatever it was, it brought hope not just to the parents, but to everyone who heard the story. As the days went on, the child slowly regained strength. Their voice remained soft, but they could now open their eyes for short moments. Each time they did, the mother would smile and whisper words of love. The father would sit quietly, holding their hand, thanking the universe for giving them another chance. One afternoon, when the doctor came for a checkup, he asked the child about the words they had spoken. "Do you remember what you saw?" he asked kindly. The child nodded faintly. "It was bright," they whispered, "and peaceful. I wasn't scared. But something told me to come back." The doctor listened carefully, then smiled softly. "Then I guess you listened to the right voice." That night, after everyone had left, the parents sat beside the bed, holding hands. The room was quiet except for the soft sound of their child's breathing. The mother whispered, "Do you think it was a miracle?" The father smiled faintly. "I don't know what to call it," he said. "But I know we were given another chance. And I'll never forget it." The mother nodded, her eyes full of tears but also peace. "Neither will I." The hospital staff continued to watch the recovery with amazement. The doctors ran test after test, but the results always came back the same. The brain was healing, the body was stronger, and the child was improving every day. There was no medical explanation for it, but no one needed one. The only thing that mattered was that life had returned. The parents made sure never to leave the room again except to take turns resting. They wanted to be there for every smile, every word, every small miracle that followed. Each time the child spoke, even if it was just a few words, they listened as if hearing music for the first time. And in those quiet hours of the night, when the world outside was asleep, the mother would sometimes whisper, "You saved us too." Because in truth, those few words from their child, the words that no one expected to ever hear, had brought life back not just to a small hospital room, but to two hearts that had nearly given up hope. The weeks that followed were filled with small miracles. Every day the child grew a little stronger. What once seemed impossible became part of a quiet, steady rhythm of recovery. The hospital room that had once been filled with fear now felt warm, touched by hope. Nurses often stopped by just to peek in and smile. Even the doctors who had long faces before now spoke with a light in their eyes. Each morning the parents would arrive early, bringing gentle laughter and stories. They wanted the room to feel alive again. They placed drawings by the bed, pictures the child had made months before the accident. The mother would read aloud from favorite storybooks, and the father often sat quietly, holding a small stuffed toy that had survived the crash. The child, now awake and alert, would smile softly when they saw it. There was still pain, still weakness, but it no longer scared anyone. Every breath felt like a blessing. The doctor explained that what had happened was medically unexplainable. He called it a rare recovery, something science couldn't easily define. "We'll run more tests," he said, "but I've never seen anything quite like this." The parents nodded, though they didn't care about explanations anymore. For them, the reason didn't matter. Their child was here alive, and that was more than enough. On a quiet afternoon, as sunlight spilled through the hospital window, the child spoke softly to the mother. "I remember the light," they said, their voice still weak but calm. "It was warm and soft, and it told me to go back. It said people were waiting for me." The mother listened, her eyes filling with tears. "What did it look like?" she asked. The child thought for a moment. "It wasn't a person," they said. "It was like love, like when you hug me." The mother's heart swelled with emotion. She squeezed their hand gently and whispered, "Then I'm so glad you listened." The story of what happened began to spread beyond the hospital walls. People from other rooms asked to meet the family. Nurses from different departments came just to see the child who had woken up after all hope was gone. Some brought flowers, some brought handmade cards from their own children. The story touched everyone it reached. People who had been struggling with their own losses or pain said they felt hope again after hearing it. The father noticed how even strangers seemed changed by what happened. He often found himself standing by the window late at night, looking out at the city lights, thinking about how close they had come to losing everything. He realized how fragile life truly was, how quickly it could be taken, and how powerful love and faith could be in bringing it back. Days turned into weeks, and soon the hospital staff began to talk about sending the child home. The idea felt unreal at first. Home had seemed like a faraway dream, something they might never see again. But as the final tests came back and the doctors nodded with cautious smiles, the dream became real. The day they were discharged, the entire staff gathered by the door to say goodbye. There were tears, hugs, and laughter. The head nurse knelt beside the child and said, "You gave all of us something we'll never forget." The doctor smiled, his voice soft but full of warmth. "Take care of that light," he said. "It seems you brought some of it back with you." When the family finally stepped outside, the sunlight felt different. The air was fresh, and the world seemed somehow new. The parents stood for a moment, holding their child between them, breathing deeply. It wasn't just a hospital discharge, it was a new beginning. At home, things felt quieter, slower. The child needed rest and therapy, but that didn't bother anyone. Every small step felt like a celebration. The family turned simple moments into precious memories. Watching a movie together, eating soup, sitting on the porch to feel the evening breeze. They had learned that nothing ordinary was truly ordinary anymore. Neighbors came by often, bringing food or flowers. Everyone wanted to see the child who had returned from the edge of death. The parents welcomed them with gratitude, though they tried to keep things calm for recovery. The child was shy at first, unsure of all the attention, but soon began to smile and laugh again. The sound of that laughter filled the house like sunshine. One evening, as the family sat together watching the sunset, the father asked softly, "Do you remember what you felt when you came back?" The child looked thoughtful, their small fingers tracing the pattern on the blanket. I felt you, they said. Both of you were calling me. I didn't want you to be sad. The light told me I could come back if I wanted to. So I did. The mother reached out and brushed the child's hair gently. We're so proud of you, she whispered. You've been so brave. The child smiled. You were brave too, they said. You never stopped waiting. The father looked away for a moment, his eyes wet, pretending to focus on the horizon. But inside, he knew those words would stay with him forever. Months passed, and life slowly returned to a quiet routine. The child began school again, still a little weaker, but full of energy and curiosity. Teachers and classmates welcomed them like a hero. There was a warmth in the way people looked at them now, as if everyone could sense the miracle that had happened. The family made it a tradition to visit the hospital once a month. They brought small gifts for the staff, thank you notes, chocolates, and sometimes a drawing made by the child. Each visit reminded them of how far they had come and how much love it had taken to reach that point. The nurses would smile and say, "We still talk about you all the time. You gave us hope." As time went on, the story began to spread even further. A local newspaper wrote about it, calling it the miracle child. Reporters wanted interviews, but the parents politely declined. They didn't want fame or attention. They only wanted peace and gratitude. Still, the story found its way into people's hearts. It became a story told by neighbors, shared in gatherings, whispered in hospital halls whenever someone felt like giving up. One afternoon, about a year later, the family was invited to speak at a small community event. The father hesitated at first, but then agreed. When the day came, he stood before the small crowd, his voice calm but full of emotion. He didn't talk about science or miracles. He spoke about love, patience, and faith. We learned, he said, that even when everything seems lost, sometimes the smallest spark can bring life back. Never stop believing even when it feels impossible. The crowd was silent for a long time after he finished. Then one by one, people began to clap. Some wiped their eyes. The story had touched something deep inside them. Back at home, the child sat on the porch watching the stars. The mother joined, wrapping a blanket around their shoulders. The night air was cool and calm. The child looked up and said quietly, "Do you think the light watches us?" The mother smiled softly. "I think so," she said. "And I think it's proud of you." The child leaned closer, resting their head on her shoulder. "I'm proud of you too," they said. The mother laughed gently, her heart full. The father came out with 2 cups of tea, sitting beside them. The 3 of them sat together, silent but peaceful. The sound of crickets filled the air and the stars twinkled above. After everything they had been through, this quiet moment felt like the greatest gift of all. Years later, when people asked about that day, the day the child spoke after everyone had given up, the parents would smile softly before answering. They never exaggerated or tried to explain. They simply said, "Our child reminded us that hope never dies. Sometimes, when you think everything is over, that's when the miracle begins." And they meant every word, because deep down they all knew that life isn't just about what can be explained. It's about what's felt. The love that pulls you through the darkest nights, the faith that keeps you standing, and the hope that returns when you least expect it. And so, the story of the child's last words didn't just end with survival. It became a reminder for everyone who heard it. A reminder that even in the quietest moments when the world feels heavy and still, a whisper of love can change everything. The family never forgot that day. They carried it with them in their hearts, not as a tale of fear, but as a story of light. And every night before bed, the mother would whisper the same words to the child she almost lost. "It wasn't your time, and we're so grateful it wasn't." The child would smile, their eyes soft and bright. "I know," they would reply. The light said love is stronger than anything. And with that, they would close their eyes, safe in the warmth of a home filled with love, a heart full of gratitude, and a story that would live forever.